Welcome to Global View. Joining us today, an extraordinary journalist, a fearless truth seeker who's reported from some of the most dangerous conflict zones in the world, Lara Logan. Known for hard-hitting investigation and unfiltered commentary, Lara has built a reputation as one of the most respected journalists in the world. From CBS 60 Minutes to her independent work exposing corruption, human trafficking, and media manipulation, she's never backed down from speaking the truth, even when it came to great personal cost. Lara, it's an honor to have you with us today.
Thank you. I was putting my do not disturb on, so that thank you very much for having me.
Absolutely, Lara. It's a pleasure to have you on. You come from a long experience of 16 years, if I'm not wrong, in the mainstream media. You worked as a CBS journalist, correspondent in the most dangerous conflict zone war in the world. How the shift from the legacy media to independent platform affected your approach to journalism?
Well, I started as a journalist in newspapers in South Africa when I was 17 years old, and that was back in the 1980s, the late 80s. And then I was in Sunday newspapers, daily newspapers. Then I worked at a news agency. So long before I joined CBS, I had years and years of journalism experience in both radio and television and print. And I worked at ABC News and at NBC News before my 16 years at CBS. And I was also a correspondent at 60 Minutes, which is the main investigative news program. Really kept the news division afloat, and it's also the most was the most respected in the world. And so, I would say that I learned about the principles of real journalism, when journalism is done the way it should be done. And I actually, a few years ago, I wrote what I call the 10 Commandments of real journalism, because I feel like those things are easily lost. And in the new media environment, whether it's writing stories with AI, that just kills me. I got to tell you, I'm very concerned about business models that exist on AI. I said to a group who was really trying to address the imbalance in the media where, certain political ideologies dominate completely, right? That was the situation before Elon Musk bought X, or before Roger Ailes created Fox. And even after he created Fox, this dominance remained. And as anybody knows, when one political ideology dominates completely, it usually doesn't bring out the best in anyone over time. So, that's the whole point of the First Amendment: freedom of speech, freedom of religion, freedom of thought, freedom of association. All those freedoms are, they need to be protected. And part of what protects them is not having monopolies. So whether it's monopoly of ideology or a monopoly of, platforms, or whatever it happens to be, ideas, we know that what happens when people have monopolies. That's why we have antitrust legislation. And then what did we do? We threw all of that out of the window. And we said, oh, don't worry about antitrust legislation. Let's let Microsoft let Google take over search engines. Let Microsoft take over computing systems. And so on and so on, right? Throughout technology, we see that technology is really, the success of technology is built on monopoly power. Because what's the point of having iMessage if half the world doesn't have apples?
Yeah.
iMessage is going to be useless.
True.
What's the point of having Microsoft Word and most businesses, and individuals doing everything in Word, if everybody else can't read that program? If you have to keep downloading and use new software every time just to communicate, nobody's going to do it. So the entire, technology is built on monopoly power, but we don't address that. We don't address, there's no digital bill of rights. There's nothing that really protects us in the digital world. And yet the digital world is increasingly taken over the real world, because now we react to things in media where we don't even know if they're true or not, right? We literally have no idea if they're true or not. So, that works both ways, because on the one hand, the fall of legacy media has been a self-inflicted wound. They've been systematically slitting their own throats, not because they made mistakes, but because they allowed themselves to betray their own responsibilities and duties to the truth. I just heard a TED talk with the head of NPR, I think it is, and saying that, I think we all made a mistake in pursuing the truth. And it's like, what? What are you talking about? What do you mean we all made a mistake in pursuing the truth? Like, the only thing, actually, the only real constant in media is the truth, right? Excuse my little dog, she has to be on my lap. That's literally, the truth is literally the only thing that actually matters, because we are all biased. We are all, if you're young, you have less experience and perspective. If you're old, you've been old enough to get cynical and see things a certain way, experience things. And all of these things feed into our collective bias. So what protects us from ourselves as journalists is the truth. Because whether you like it or I like it, it's either true or it isn't. So they introduced this concept of relative truth, my truth versus your truth. I don't know, how your program is, but quite frankly, there's no better way to describe that than BS, right? It's absolute nonsense. There isn't your truth and my truth. How we perceive the truth, sure, that changes. That depends on our individual outlook and perspective and experience. But the truth itself doesn't change. And so, in some ways, the long answer to your question is that some things have never changed in my career. I still look for the truth the same way that I always did. Understanding that a lot of the time the media gets away with reporting things not because they're true, but because they fit the prevailing ideology of those with power. So, what I mean by that is, you can sail through your career thinking you never made a mistake. Well, maybe you just, nobody called out your mistakes because they wanted you to be successful because you were useful. You were a useful tool in what is really an information war. So I used to believe I was just a journalist. Now I understand that information, we are in fifth generation warfare. So we began with soldiers on a battlefield with shields and swords stabbing each other, and we went through all the generations of warfare as it became mechanized, as we got planes and navy warships and tanks on the battlefield, and we got guns, and then we went, we had states fighting states, and then we had terrorist organizations, non-state actors fighting us. And then we evolved into information war. And that's where the digital world, the intersection of media and our digital reality is really become so important, because now in the information war, you see people say, you get Larry Elder running in Los Angeles, right? And what do they say about him? They say he's a white supremacist. Well, if you know who Larry Elder is, it's ridiculous. He's black. Are you kidding me? How is Larry Elder a white supremacist? But in the digital world, you can change Larry Elder's image. You can make Larry Elder white if you need him to be. You can't do it right now because he's still living, and because there's enough people alive who still know who Larry Elder is and will speak up. What about 100 years from now?
Yes.
With AI and digital technology, you can change every image of Larry Elder that ever existed, except for the paper one. So what are we under pressure to do? Enroll in paperless statements all the time, right? Paperless this, paperless that. Well, wouldn't that be great if we never have any paper, if we don't have any physical record, then in the digital world becomes our record. So how has my journalism changed? Well, the fundamental principles of journalism, they don't change, because the fundamental principles of life don't change. I believe they come from God. Those are our inalienable rights. What Shakespeare wrote about is relevant today because it was built on principles of human behavior. What the Spartans fought for, they fought for freedom. We're still fighting for freedom. Those things don't change over time. But the battlefield on which we operate has been shifting dramatically around us. And I would urge people to hold true to that which matters in real journalism, because this idea that we lose nothing if we just lose it all, that's not true. This benefits the people who turned the mainstream legacy traditional media into propagandists. It benefits them more than anyone, because they don't want inquiring minds.
No, they don't. And you make a great point about the job of journalists, which is to narrate the truth, while actually the journalists have been delivering opinions at the service of an agenda. So basically building up narratives, even interfering in elections, like with the Hunter Biden laptop story, which was passed. So we have collusion between intelligence agencies and media outlets. So we now have AI where you can fabricate everything you want, from voices to images to skin colors and everything else. And I like when you say, like, looking back, how they will write history at this time, because when witnesses won't be there, how can we tell? But how actually respect you a lot, because you come from real journalism background. Right now, the other side of the free speech, which a free platform where everybody improvises himself as journalist. So can you spot the difference between
Yes.
yes. And that's why I'm really fascinated by people like you who actually come from this solid background and then choose the pattern of the truth, and you did it as a choice, right? So it was your choice to fight for truth at cost of how much you sacrificed for this choice. And how do you believe this improvised journalist will affect narratives as well? Because I think there is a wide zone that is still not regulated, and we still should be very careful about what we read and what we acquire as a source of information.
So I think ultimately we have to take refuge in the principles, right? And if we recognize what the principles are, if we know who we are and what we stand for, then that helps to guide us to the truth. Because some of this is unknowable. I mean, the reality is I'm one person. I don't have a corporation behind me. I don't have any of those resources. I don't have, teams of producers. No, very few independent journalists actually are making a lot of money. And what that means is there's no real investment in the next generation or even among your peers. I mean, I've known James O'Keefe for a very long time. James is one of the few who's been extraordinarily successful against the odds. And, the New York Times and others don't even allow him to call himself a journalist. But, if you look at James O'Keefe, Tucker Carlson, Charlie Kirk, the principles that I'm talking about will allow you to identify who each of these people really are, right? Because what are the principles? Well, a journalist is not an activist. Yeah. This is one of the biggest things today, is that journalists have become activists. Now, can you as a journalist, I mean, is there overlap? Can you say, I care passionately, like for me, I want to do a lot of coverage on child trafficking because I believe that as a society, I don't think that we're meant to say, okay, children are raped for money, isn't that terrible, and go back to our daily lives. But I try to always remain true to being a journalist and not becoming an activist for any one campaign. So, like I did a lot of reporting on January 6th, and many of the guys would say to me, or their families and others would say, thank you so much for being on our side and for helping us. And I always would tell them, I'm not on your side. Like, I'm on the side of the truth. And it just happens to be that you have the truth on your side. If you had not been set up, if you had not had all your constitutional rights violated, if it was actually just to send SWAT teams in to raid the homes of people arrested on nonviolent Class C misdemeanor charges, if that was actually the right thing to do, you would not see me as being on your side. But your rights have been violated at every turn, and I'm standing up for the rights. So somebody significant said to me when they were looking at the pardons of the J6s, there was like, well, if there were trained agitators and people paid in the crowd to cause trouble, we don't want them to be pardoned. And I said, all January 6th defendants were denied a First Amendment defense. That's a First Amendment violation. Every single prosecution was corrupt. If you feel that people were trained agitators that were paid to go to the Capitol and agitate, you need to try them for that. You need to do the work, build that case, prove it in a court of law, and hold them accountable for the real crime. But you don't, you know what I mean? Whether I like them or not, whether you're Antifa or you're, MAGA, it doesn't matter. If your constitutional rights were violated, you never got a fair trial, you were denied a proper defense, and so on and so on. We as a society have to stand for that. So you can tell, when you look at the media landscape, you can tell, is this person an activist, more of an activist than a journalist? Are they going to stick by their cause? The cause could be political, it could be anything. Are they going to stick by that no matter what? Because at a certain point, for example, I grew up in South Africa. Nelson Mandela's wife, Winnie Mandela, was a real symbol of resistance. She did extraordinary things. She was subjected to terrible things, and she fought, and she was strong, and she was amazing. But along the way, she became corrupt. And she did beat, and had her soccer club, which was like a band of thugs, beat a young boy to death. Well, an activist says, we don't want that to be public because we don't want anything to ruin the cause. We're trying to get Mandela out of jail. We're fighting for freedom. We can't let that, right? But a journalist says, you beat a young boy to death. No matter what it does to the cause, I have to tell the truth. And that's a very important principle. If you remember as a journalist that you are not a lawyer, you're not in a court of law trying to prove a case. If it is true, you will always find a way to get to the truth. Maybe not right now. Like one of the great frustrations, I'm sure that affected you personally, Russia collusion. I knew from the first moment that it was a lie. When I read the Steele dossier, I knew it was a fake political hit job. I knew that not because I liked Donald Trump, because of the way it was done. It was so obvious. And so for me personally, I would say to you, you said I made a choice. I did make a choice, but not the one you think. I made a choice to follow the facts wherever they took me. I didn't know where they were going to go. I didn't stand up bravely and say, I'm going to give up everything. I followed the facts, and I actually believed that everyone would follow with me because I thought that was the whole point. I thought we were all united in that. I was given, almost every award in journalism. I mean, they wrote about me in the New York Times and the Washington Post and in Vogue magazine, and I had the editor of the New Yorker magazine wrote to me when I was, attacked and gang raped working for 60 Minutes. He wrote to me, an attack on one is an attack on all of us. I believed it. So I was shocked when I followed the truth and I got there, and it was a place that was politically uncomfortable in 2016 because of Benghazi was not good for Hillary Clinton's reelection. And this was in 2013. I wasn't even thinking about the election. I mean, it had nothing to do with it. I did that story because I knew that we didn't have the truth. And I wanted to find out the truth to get as close as I could. And I was savaged, right? And my reporting was savaged. And that was the beginning of my understanding. Now, could I have chosen then to take a knee? Because let me tell you what they do to you. Before they slit your throat, when they got you down on the ground and they delivered the first blow, you know what they do? They have their foot on your throat, you're on your back in the dirt, and they lean down and they offer you a hand. And if you take that hand, you're good. If you're General Stanley McChrystal, they don't attack Stan McChrystal today anymore, do they? How do you know who took the hand? Because they've been rehabilitated. Yes. How do you know who didn't take the hand? Because they're not allowed to come back. Donald Trump didn't take the hand. I didn't take the hand. General Stanley McChrystal took the hand. Mike Flynn did not take the hand.
That's impressive. Wow, thanks.
Lara, this is a fascinating conversation already, and it's putting chills down my spine, actually, because it's also one thing to think that the media is telling the truth. It's another for it to be intentionally obfuscated and distorted, and that actual truth seekers like yourself are then demonized and basically punished and in many ways forever banned from this little exclusive club that they're trying to put together. So you mentioned activism within journalism and the deleterious consequences of what that looks like. In my own experience, if you want to call it, with some people in these mainstream media outlets, from big newspapers to big channels, especially during the Russia collusion time.
Yes.
I would actually tell them things that would later come out that were then declassified. I mean, in 2017, 2018, and they intentionally suppressed it, just like the Hunter laptop stuff. So my impression at that time was that these groups were actually embedded with the intel agencies. Because I've been in conversations with intel agencies throughout my career. I used to work in the think tank industry, the energy industry. I've met these people. I know what they look like, how they
Yes.
talk. And the people that I was talking to in the media were responding to me as if they were active intelligence. So the question I have,
Mm-hmm.
I think that the Mockingbird media theory, which states that these groups have been infiltrated by the intel agencies to then craft narratives from within to then disseminate to the people, is true, or is that a conspiracy theory? That's something that's always been on my mind, to know what the real facts are behind that.
Well, that's a very interesting question, right? And from my perspective, um, nobody ever tried to recruit me. Nobody ever tried to force me to say anything. You know, one night I remember being annoyed in Baghdad because the city had just fallen, and I was there on my own for CBS. I had nobody with me. I'd been there, you know, for weeks and weeks on my own, and I hadn't eaten or slept a lot at all. And I was on every show the network had. And I remember they'd been so grateful for my coverage. And that night, when I did my story for the evening news, I had been with the Marines that day, and I had said to the Marine commander, you know, you guys are celebrating, or the whole world's celebrating. I said, but you guys realize that the war just begun. This is the first night of the real war. And he said, oh, hell yeah. Like, and we had a very interesting conversation. He understood everything that I understood and that I knew. It was the opposite of what I expected. So that night, I ended my piece with the real battle for Baghdad has only just begun. And I got a call from New York saying, well, you know, the whole world's celebrating and this is a big victory. And don't you think that's a little bit depressing? You know, I said, well, what do you, and I'm mad, right? Because I am reporting the truth. And they said, well, I said, what do you want? What are you trying to say? They said, well, you know, can you make it something a little bit more positive? And I don't remember exactly what it was that I said. I mitigated it a little bit by saying that there were, you know, many people were filled with hope for the future, while others were concerned that the real battle is just beginning. So I softened it, you know, but I didn't have firsthand experience of knowing that there were people within the organizations that were not really journalists or that were working for agencies. But remember, when I was sort of, you know, when I met reality was in 2013. I think a lot of these people began to show themselves after Donald Trump was elected. I think it had been, if you actually go back to the very beginning, CBS News was established by a man called William Paley. William Paley was a naval intelligence officer.
Exactly, yes. Yeah.
Exactly.
So if you start to break it down, you see the hand of the intelligence agencies inside of the media from the very beginning. But because of the Constitution, because of the First Amendment, the sort of the mantra in the spy world and in the media world and all the rest of it, this was this kind of accepted thing that you never pose as a journalist, because the Fourth Estate is this kind of holy grail, right? The sacred ground of the First Amendment. What a load of hogwash. Okay, we now know that that is not true at all. And when you look at the fact that, you know, David Rhodes, former Deputy National Security Advisor to Susan Rice, and architect of the false narrative on Benghazi, and also part of Russia collusion, who was his brother, was Ben Rhodes. That, you know, Ben Rhodes is doing all of that. His brother David Rhodes is running CBS News. He wasn't qualified to run CBS News. And then when you start to break down, you know, George, you talked about, you ran into a lot of these people, right? So you learn to recognize them. Here's another way you start to recognize them. You look at their credentials and you look at where they end up, and there's a disconnect. Why does a person with a degree from here and a degree from there end up in this job? How come they all come out of there? Like, you start to look at the Mark Zuckerbergs of this world and you realize, come on, that story that he created Facebook is ridiculous. DARPA creates it with the agency. They seed people into places like colleges because they find young, gullible people. They share the idea, little bits of the idea. They get them to think it's their idea. They see who becomes the best candidate. They've got, you know, shell companies set up that are then going to, come forward as donors. Oh, we've got some seed money for you to start your business, right? And they develop the largest intelligence collection system the world has ever seen, where people are willingly submitting themselves to be spied upon. So, once you start to break these things down, you start to understand it better. And with, what happened with the election of Donald Trump is you really saw people that they did not control come into positions of power. And it was unexpected. They lost control over key parts of the intelligence operation that they'd been running for a long time. So what did they have to do? They had to scramble very, very quickly to start subverting and infiltrating people everywhere that they could. And I saw something I never in my life expected happen with the media. I saw journalists go from people who, like, typically, I made big news when I was asked about bias in the media, and I told Mike Ritland on his podcast, Mike Drop, that most of the media are liberal. You don't need intelligence agents to insert and manage narratives when everybody is on the same page ideologically, or almost, or close to, right? So this indoctrination began long ago in schools and in colleges and journalism programs, where everybody just kind of that gravitated towards that was like-minded in many respects. And if they weren't when they got there, they certainly were when they came out of it. And then on top of that, you instituted a system of reward. So if you follow I'm a journalist at 60 Minutes. I can choose between doing a story that I know is going to be not very welcome, and I'm going to be probably attacked for it, or I can choose a story that I know is going to be, I'm going to probably win an award. Natural human behavior and human instinct means they choose the path of least resistance. They choose the path of reward. Sometimes it's, I can't afford it, I just started a family, I have a mortgage. And, most of the time it's just that people are more often moral cowards than they are courageous. So they, and plus we have this built into our DNA, is that we're herd animals, right? Why do animals herd together in the wild? For safety, for their survival. So to a degree, you can't really blame people. What they're so good at is taking basic human nature and exploiting that, and then implementing a system that is self-sustaining. So when people are corrupt, what happens? They have a vested interest in maintaining the system that enriched them through that corruption. One, because they want it to keep going, and two, because they don't want to be exposed and be held accountable. So now you have all these people that went along with, say, FBI agents that went along with January 6th persecutions. Well, now they're going to defend that system at all costs because they don't want to be held accountable. Whether or not they were ideologically bought into everything from the beginning, it doesn't matter anymore. It's become irrelevant. So what happened to the media in 2016 with Donald Trump's election is they went nuts. I mean, they literally went insane. They went so far from the mandate and the responsibility and the duty and the principles of being a real journalist that they took people like you, George, and they didn't care if they destroyed you. They didn't want to know where the little black book came from or this and that. And, you, Paul Manafort, Carter Page, they didn't want to know that Carter Page was a naval graduate, that Carter Page was working for the CIA, that Carter Page was helping the FBI prosecute real Russian spies, that they picked on Carter Page because he had placement and access to Russia. And they could take things in his story and they could misrepresent them and they could destroy this man's life. And they would mock him relentlessly. And even when it came out, they were forced to admit that the CIA altered. The CIA admitted that Carter Page was working for them. An FBI attorney altered the documents, took a fraudulent application to the FISA court. The FISA court judges acted against the law. All of this comes out. You could say in the beginning, okay, the head of the Intel, committee, the White House, whatever, these people with positions of authority, this is the former head of the CIA, I'm going to believe him. But over time, when they were exposed for lying, what did you see happen? You didn't see people own their mistakes. You didn't see them say, wow, we were really misled. You didn't see any outrage at the people that lied to them. What you saw and said was people who refused to take responsibility, refused to correct the narrative, and then double down on their lies. And as far as I'm concerned, these people are absolutely worthless. There's not one single one of them that should still have a job in journalism, and they should have been held accountable. I don't know because I'm not a lawyer, but there has to be some kind of mechanism under law, even if it's a civil mechanism, where you don't get to knowingly and intentionally propagate false information that destroys people's lives.
Unfortunately, this has been a tool, and it was hard to believe that they would be so vicious. And I always say, you don't believe the fake news until you become the fake news, right?
Yeah.
I saw myself portrayed as a Russian agent. I had the ABC news reporter going to my hometown in Italy, asking my parents for a certificate and not doing a story about it. They were just twisting every piece of misinformation they would find.
Actually, I want to tell you something. That story about you being a Russian agent is one of the things I investigated, and I looked at it and I was like, wow, it's incredible how they lie. It was one of the ways I was looking at NBC as well, because MSNBC also loved to say this about you.
Yeah.
And I looked at that, and I looked at how they had put that together, and I was like, wow, these people, because I think you even at one point, either you or your attorney or somebody wrote a history of where you actually came from.
Exactly. And here they completely neglected to say who I am, where I come from, my background, just making me look like this shady person. Like, I don't know, if you had an accuracy on my LinkedIn about 2 months starting a job instead of 2 months later or earlier, they would say that I lied about my job experiences, which was not true. Everything is public. But once I provided and they looked for all this information, they never published them.
So they didn't care.
Questioning my origins, questioning my family, this is like a character assassination, which nobody ever apologized for. And I think accountability is a big issue in this country, even when it comes
a big issue.
Health policies, transparency. You have been, you emphasized the necessity, the need to have accountability of government agencies when it comes to transparency in health policies, which actually save or kill lives. What would you think about that? Do you think there is any reform that can be, because as far as I'm concerned, when I asked my lawyer to react to those false allegations, the response I got is that you are public, you became public. What? Public for being defamed as a Russian spy. So there are so many limits to protect.
Did you fire your lawyer?
I actually
because you should, because he's not working for you.
But it was not, and also then you had it's a really vicious thing, and accountability is important in many ways, not only like when it comes to personal defamation, but also when you mislead all your audience of people that should be entitled to have transparency and accuracy when it comes to health policies. Think about COVID, how they reported about in the COVID, and now we know that Biden preventively pardoned Fauci for a reason, right? So I wanted to.
If Biden knew he was doing it, we don't even know that.
Maybe whoever was doing it for him.
The auto pen.
Yes.
Okay, the issue of accountability is a very serious one. I think it really goes to the heart of everything that we're looking at right now. The truth is that the deep state, the domestic enemies of America, its foreign enemies, this global cult or this group of people that want to, incredibly, sounds like a movie, but they want to rule the world. And it's not, I mean, from the beginning of time, people have wanted global domination, right? Whether it's the Persians or the British or whoever it is, the Ottomans. So that's not a strange concept. And right now, we have the best chance we've ever had of upending a system that has been, over more than a century being put in place. It's very obvious that their strategy is to stall and wait it out. If you can get Trump to the midterms without having anyone arrested, any real accountability, and you can take the Senate or the House in the midterms, you can derail his agenda. You've got less than 18 months now. You've got about 14 months before everyone just talks midterms. And then once the midterms are coming up, that governs and dominates the entire landscape. If you look at how politics has worked traditionally. Now, I don't know if it's going to play out like this, because you don't know what you don't know. But when you look at it like that, Trump doesn't even have 4 years. He has less than 4 years. Now, maybe they obliterate people in the midterms, in the election races, but the machines are still in place. All the issues of cheating and stealing that were in place in 2020 and 2024, they remain an issue. So you don't know how that's going to go. Plus, in 2024, there was so much cheating on the down ballot that there should be a much bigger majority in the House and the Senate. And if you go back a little bit further, why does California have so many members of Congress? Because they count everybody who's illegal on the census. So the cheating is so deeply entrenched inside the system that you have some very significant issues that anyone who comes in that wants to tear up this system is going to face. You also find that you have an absolute mega money laundering scheme through the government, where the government and U.S. taxpayer have actually been funding all of these things, everything. I mean, everything that George Soros and the Open Society and Open Borders and the Knight Foundation, Ford Foundation, Tides Foundation, BLM, I mean, you name it. This NGO industrial complex that they have built is funded by the taxpayer. So when you imagine what was the first thing that they did, it was incredibly smart. Trump went after their money supply. He went after their taxpayer funded dollars. Because whoever you are, if you're going to go after the people that were really responsible for a seditious conspiracy, treason and sedition, right, who actually subverted a legally elected president, and as part of a very well organized criminal conspiracy, you'd have to take down the former head of the CIA, the former DNI, at least 2 former presidents, the former head of counterintelligence and his deputy in the FBI, the former head of the FBI. So when you start to look at all of that, right, nobody's ever done anything like that in the history of this country before. So how do you begin to do it? Not to mention that all of these agencies are stacked with hardcore left-wing Marxist bureaucrats who've been there forever, who are subverting from within. Stole. Throw up, put them on the defense, take them off the offense, put them on the defense. That's an obvious strategy. Worked the first time around. So sometimes you do that with lawfare, with over 150 cases that have been, suits that have been launched to tie you up in the court system, whether they're legitimate or illegitimate doesn't matter. Every day that you spend dealing with that, and then set you up to provide opportunities for you now to set the narrative. So what was one of the examples from Russia collusion? Oh, well, George Papadopoulos. Oh, well, what's another one? The Trump Tower meeting, the Magnitsky Act. And then it was the Goldman Sachs servers. So you see these things. These are CIA intelligence operations. The signal chat. Nobody accidentally adds one of the most hardcore operatives for the radical Marxist progressives globalists like Jeffrey Goldberg in the Atlantic. No one accidentally acts that to a signal chat, okay? That's a setup. So when you see these tactics being used, they're using what they did the last time around that's been so successful for them. So all they have to do is string it out and wait it out. And then keep inserting their people, create chaos, disrupt, destroy, right? Disrupt and destroy. That's what they're trying to do. So in a sense, some people look at it and say, well, Trump has 4 years. No, he doesn't have 4 years. And it's not even really about Trump. One of the most important things he's ever said is that it's really about you. I'm just standing in the way. And that is accurate. So without accountability, every single thing that Trump does is kind of like a Band-Aid on a gaping wound. If you don't hold people accountable for fraud, waste, and abuse inside the government system, for stealing U.S. tax dollars, if you're sending money to children as business loans, if you're sending money to dead people as Social Security and Medicare, if you're sending money abroad, millions of dollars abroad, those are, I'm choosing the non-political arguments, right? Because that's clearly fraud. It's not political. It's not, you're not like transgender this and that. And, and where you can argue that, mortality and maternal health in Sudan is important for our national security. No, you cannot say that paying dead people millions of dollars is important for our national security, or is about who we are as Americans, or is about, the identity of America as being, standing for good in the world. No, it's not about any of that. It's clear fraud. If you do not hold people accountable, they'll find another way to steal it. All they'll do is shift and lift, stall, and wait. And if you allow them to get away with treason, they will continue to subvert and be involved in treasonous activities. So John Brennan, who was guilty of treason, Perkins Coie, Hillary Clinton, all of these people that went after you, George, Susan Rice, James Clapper, James Comey, Peter Strzok, all of these disgusting people and all the others whose names we don't know, all those FISA court judges that were involved, all of them, they continued to operate during the Biden years. And now they're continuing to operate to subvert Trump now. But when you take away their security clearances, that to me is an indication that you are moving to box people in. If you've taken away their source of money, now you're taking away their security clearances, which is what? It's their placement and access is now being removed from them. So if this is an intelligence operation, if the intelligence agencies are running this operation of subversion, well, taking away placement and access hurts them. Taking away their money supply hurts them. And there's been many warnings, from people saying to them, preserve your records, which indicates that accountability is coming. But it needs to extend to the news media, to Dr. Fauci and all those people in the NIH and in the pharmaceutical companies who covered up actual real scientific data that showed that this medical experiment was hurting pregnant women, hurting young girls, hurting young people with causing heart failure, causing cancer, all of these things. If you allow these people to get away with it, doctors who should have known better, they're just going to do it again.
That's exactly the point. And now Trump is declassified also other documents concerning the Russiagate. Do you think with the Kash Patel as the head of the FBI, Dan Bongino as deputy director, and Pam Bondi as attorney general, we will finally see accountability, which I agree with you is the issue?
Well, if we don't, they're all going to jail. Because if you don't have accountability, they're going to lose this fight. And if they lose this fight, they will be destroyed. Lara, and so will we, by the way, all of us. Anyone who stands in their way.
Yes.
Totally. I completely agree. Lara, last question for me. This has been an incredible, very enlightening conversation. Based on everything that you just said, from transparency to accountability to the new medium of media, new narratives, new facts coming out, do you really think that the American people are ready for what's coming? Or do you still think that they're asleep at the wheel?
I believe in the truth. Okay. And what I've seen in my life is that, first of all, I don't think it's our position to make decisions like that. So certainly me as a journalist. And maybe if I'm a policymaker, maybe if I'm Donald Trump, or Pam Bondi, maybe you could argue it's different. I don't really think it is, though, because when my doctor told me at 41 years old that I had cancer, I wasn't ready for that. But I didn't have a choice. I had to adapt, didn't I? I had to adapt. And if I wanted to live and I wanted to survive, I had to deal with it. So we are a society that has allowed children to be raped for money and for, evil on an industrial scale. We can't allow that to happen anymore. So whether you're ready for that truth or you're not ready for that truth doesn't really matter, because it's gone on too long. So if the government is stealing from you and it's going to affect the running and the function of government, well, that's kind of like, it's kind of like if you discover you have a parasite in your body that's slowly killing you. What are you going to do? Are you just going to leave it in there to slowly kill you because if you have surgery, you might die? I go for surgery. What would you take?
Surgery.
Right. Because ultimately, so I never presume that I know what people can handle and what they can't handle. Because what I saw, one of the most arrogant, elitist things that I saw throughout my career in the media was journalists saying, oh, people, you know, they can't handle it, or they're too stupid, or they don't understand, or whatever. And my boss, Jeff Fager at 60 Minutes, once said in a screening, never underestimate the audience. And I thought a lot about that, because I was like, you know, he's right. We do over and over again. We underestimate the audience. And then I started to think about why. Why do we underestimate the audience? Well, because we think we're cleverer than them. We think we're better than them. Oh, why do we think that? Well, because they don't know what I know. Well, but maybe they don't know what I know because, oh, let's see. I don't know. You're a fireman and you're working a hard job and you're not quite bringing in enough money. So you're doing, you know, you're riding an Uber at night, or you're, you know, helping people with their yards, or you're doing Christmas lights because, and oh, by the way, you've got 3 kids and life is difficult. Like, maybe it's not that you don't have the capacity to understand, or that you're too stupid to understand. Maybe it's just the fact that your life doesn't revolve around, let's see, what is the history of the schism between Sunni and Shiite Islam, and how has that affected the Persians and the Iranians and the middle, and the layout of the Middle East. You know, maybe it's not, you know, if you're a stockbroker, if you're in oil, if you're in business, if you're working in New York City, your life revolves around these things. So it's not that you're better than someone whose life doesn't revolve around those things. It's just that we all provide different functions in society. So now you're going to say that the guy that works in the coal mine, who's so exhausted when he gets home from physical labor, and he you know, that he wants to take care of his kids and he wants to go to church on a Sunday, you know, that somehow he's less. This is the kind of elitist thinking, I think, that has infected so much of our society. And I've really, you know, freed myself from all of that. That's why I love living in rural America, because I constantly meet people here who are like, who get everything, who understand it all. And you're like, oh, yeah. You know, when I was at 60 Minutes,
That's right.
I'd be in a hotel, or, you know, a restaurant, and you're in the bathroom and there's somebody working overnight in the bathroom, and they're from a third world country, and they know who you are because they watch 60 Minutes. You get in any cab, you know, in a big city. Sorry. My God. No,
Okay.
honey, stop.
It's
We have,
okay.
my daughter has a visitor. But, you know, you get in any cab driver who's sitting in their car. No, Bear, stop. Sorry.
So-
Any cab driver who's sitting in their car for hours on end, they don't listen to pop music over and over and over. No, they're listening to talk radio. They're trying to educate themselves. They're trying to learn about the world. People seek the truth all of the time. And hands down, people want to be told the truth rather than they want to be lied to. Even if it's difficult to process, even if it's painful, sure, there are lots of people who say, I don't want to know and I want to go about my life. But it's because they don't really, no one has ever said to them, you know, given them a real choice. When you were offered a cell phone, they didn't say to you, this is a surveillance device and it's going to make your life much more convenient. But we're going to take your heart, your mind, your soul. We're going to traffic your kids using this device. You'll never have any privacy again. And if you give people the whole list, what are they going to say? It's like, oh, it's okay. I'll take my chances on not having, one of those, right? There. Sorry.
Yeah, it's so cute. Babies. I just love dogs so much. I love it. I love pets so much. So it's so cute. Yes,
Sorry. Yeah. My daughter's best friend has arrived to visit, and so all the dogs are going crazy. Oh. But anyway, the point is just that I think even when the truth is very difficult to hear, that people really have demonstrated throughout history that they gravitate towards the truth. Why does the media exist? Because people seek knowledge. Why do we go to school? Why do we go to college? In fact, I would argue that one of the reasons 60 Minutes was so successful before it became, useless and worthless propaganda, is that you always learn something. Yeah. And people like to learn. And when they learn something, they think, oh, this person's really clever. Maybe you are, maybe you're not. But, that's how we feel. And so I don't think there's anything more important than learning the truth. And if you step back from it in a spiritual sense, I am the way, the truth, and the life. When you know, one of the reasons people gravitated towards Donald Trump was because they felt that he was being more honest than the average politician, and they were tired of people that sounded great and were super slick and reassured, said all the right things and made them feel good, but never ever, nothing ever changed. In fact, if anything, life only got harder. And they said, you know what, we're done with that. So when you look at freedom, it's easy to be honest about freedom because it stands for itself. When you are offering Marxism or socialism, which is a form of social control, you have to lie to people because the truth is that over time, when they've run out of government money and they've run out of your money, you know, they steal everything. They'll steal everything. They'll take the land, they'll take the businesses, they'll take your freedom, they'll take your rights, they'll steal every last thing from you. So if Hugo Chavez had run in Venezuela on the platform that he was going to impoverish the country, you know, more than 80% of people would be living below the poverty line when he was finished stealing everything they had, nobody would vote for him. So you have to lie about who you are. That's my point. Deception becomes your identity and your shield. It is your foundation. It defines you. So things that come to you in a form like that, in the form of deception and darkness, I was born to run to the light. That's how I was made. And so, and I believe, sure, when people are drawn into that darkness and they become invested in that darkness, they don't want the light. But John Stuart Mill, in the Ode to Liberty, he said, the truth is the only thing that stands up to questioning. So you should never object to being questioned and challenged, right? Because we know what happens when people lie. When you start to question them, the lie falls apart. And I think we see that today. When you start to question people about Nazism, you know, and you say, well, wasn't it the Nazis, doesn't that stand for National Socialist Party? What does that mean? Well, they were the Socialist Party. And you start to chip away at what does that mean? Where does Nazism really come from? Where does Nazism really belong? Right? Nazism and fascism are almost identical in most respects. So, and then when you start to peel away the layers, what happens? You get an emotional response because the lie is falling apart. So as you shine light into that darkness, people cannot have a substantive conversation. We cannot have a reasonable conversation about Donald Trump because somebody who says Donald Trump's a bigot and a racist, that he hates black people, and then you say, then why did Donald Trump provide grants to black universities? Why did he build opportunity zones in black areas to provide black businesses with opportunities, economic opportunities, to become self-sustaining and wealthy? Then, you know, no, they don't want to have that conversation. You get the hysterical emotional response. How can you stand by a bigot and a fascist? You know, Elon Musk made a Nazi salute. Really?
Just going like that hard to me to you, and everybody does it, but for some reason they, you know, or sometimes when you provide the evidence, they say that's Russian propaganda. Maybe it's done, you know, when
Yeah, well, because
done.
they don't want you to look at it. Remember before the election, when they said you can't look at the WikiLeaks documents because they got this from Gustafa 2.0, and Gustafa's a Russian asset, and oh, we don't want to talk about Seth Rich, right? We don't want to talk about that. What did we find out later with CrowdStrike? The head of CrowdStrike eventually, when his testimony under oath was finally made public, what did we learn? That CrowdStrike had to admit that the DNC servers had never been hacked.
Yeah.
They were never hacked, which means that information did not come from Gustafa 2.0, which means that information did not come from Russia. And what did they say? You can't print this because if you print this, you're printing Russian propaganda.
Yeah, Roger Stone has a story about that.
I bet he does.
Well, Lara, you are so inspiring, and I want to personally thank you for your work. Where people can follow you and follow your, you know, everything you do, because it's so actually it's one of the most fascinating conversations we had so far on the show. So thank you so much for that.
Well, I want you to know, both of you, that when I saw your name, I automatically said yes, I would do this because I think that we, as a nation, owe you an apology. I know you went through hell And I've been through my own hell like that. So I understand, and I can only imagine. I also know that it doesn't end. That after once you're targeted, once they have you in their sights, it never goes away. You're still in that fight. I'm in that fight more than a decade later. So, for me, it's personally important that I stand up for other people who have been victims of the same tactics. I always say, in fact, I said this in testimony before Senator Ron Johnson's committee on the Hill. I said that cancel culture and this kind of targeting is how they try to murder someone without killing them. It's just like child trafficking is how you murder a child without killing them a lot of the time, even though they do kill a lot of the children, actually kill them. But it's evil. It's pure evil, and it's a brutal struggle because people always have doubts about you afterwards, and you always have that target on you, and it changes your life forever. I think it also sets you free. I'm very grateful. I don't complain. I'm not complaining. I'm not whining, that's for sure. Because it gives you a lot of other things too. But I just want you to know that I hope that you are restored. I hope there is accountability for what happened to you. It was wrong. I fought from day one. I knew from day one, and I fought from day one, and I haven't stopped fighting. And I'm glad that you two are still strong and still standing, right? Because it is really important. This fight is not over. We have a small window of opportunity here, and it can be reversed so easily. In my mind, and this may shock some people, but in my mind, when I was attacked in Egypt and I had been gang raped and sodomized and beaten, there was a moment where I fell into a crowd of Egyptian women. I was dragged, and then their sons and husbands stood up to protect them. And so I had a moment where I could breathe. I could feel the air on my skin, and I could start to breathe again. And I realized I might not die. But that mob was right there. All they had to do was push these boys away and reach in and pull me back. And I feel like that's the moment we have right now. The deep state is inside this administration. They're still inside these agencies, these globalists. They're still inside the media. They are still powerful. They are still committed to their goal. We can feel the air on our skin. We're starting to breathe again. But at any time, if we don't make that permanent, we can get pulled back straight into that hell. And I don't know if this opportunity would ever come again in our lifetimes. So I just can't say to people enough how important it is to speak up and to stand up and to recognize where you are, to know who you are, and to fight for that.
Thank you so much. Really, you gave me, how do you say in English?
Goosebumps.
That's so strong, such an inspiration. I mean, thank you so much, really.
Thank you, both of you. Take care, huh?
Thank you.
Oh, and you can find me on X, and I have a podcast, Going Rogue with Lara Logan. And it's on Rumble, it's on YouTube. I mean, I'm just figuring the podcasting out, but that's where you can find me.
We'll be following. We already do, so.
Okay. Thank you both so much.
To do the same. Thank you so much, really.
Stay in touch.
Absolutely.